My name is Clara Bennett, and I am 34 years old. About 3 weeks ago, my aunt accidentally forwarded me a video file. There was no accompanying text, just a short recording from a weekend family dinner I had to skip because I was finalizing end-of-month financial reports for a client. I tapped the screen to watch, expecting nothing unusual. Instead, I watched my entire family roaring with laughter, my older brother mocking me as a miserable failure, and my mother dismissing my worth with a single remark that completely overturned my reality. For 6 long years, I had been funding their lives, covering the mortgage, the vehicle payments, private school tuition, and apartment rent. Yet there they sat, agreeing that I ought to feel indebted to them. I remained completely silent that evening. I simply booted up my laptop and focused on the one skill I truly master. By the time the next first of the month billing cycle rolled around, every single person seated at that dining table would realize precisely what they had been mocking and exactly how much that laughter was going to cost them. Welcome back to Silent Courage Stories, where the most unassuming person in the room is frequently the one keeping the entire structure from collapsing, and where personal dignity always outshines loud arrogance. If you have ever been the reliable backbone whom nobody bothers to appreciate, this narrative is dedicated to you. Feel free to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. It was a late Thursday evening, the hour when neighborhood streetlights are the only things still glowing outside. I was sitting at my kitchen table, eating microwave soup with one hand while cross-referencing hardware store invoices with the other. That is essentially my routine. I manage the accounting for 3 independent small businesses across town, and the workload inevitably follows me home. Suddenly, my smartphone illuminated against the countertop. It was a message from Aunt Martha. She didn't type a single word. There was just a video clip waiting there like a surprise gift. I assumed it was a standard viral video, perhaps a funny animal, or a quick reminder about my mother's upcoming milestone birthday party. I dried my fingers on a kitchen towel and opened the file. The screen cast a sharp, chilly blue glow onto the dark ceiling, and the audio blared through the tiny speaker before the image even came into focus. It was the sound of laughter. I immediately recognized every distinct voice. My mother's deep, self-satisfied chuckle, my brother's booming tone, the way he sounds after a couple of drinks, my sister's high-pitched giggle, the one she uses whenever she wants to signal her total agreement with the dominant personality in the room. The camera was positioned across a dining room table I had eaten at hundreds of times before. It was the Sunday dinner from the previous weekend, the one I couldn't attend because I was completely buried in financial closures. They had happily carried on without my presence, as they always managed to do. I increased the volume on my device. My bowl of soup sat cooling next to my notepad, entirely forgotten. I leaned closer to that small glowing screen, the same way you instinctively lean toward a conversation among strangers when you catch your own name being mentioned. Someone in that recording had just said Clara, and the entire room had erupted into amusement. My brother Derek was standing up holding his beverage. He loves doing that, making grand toasts out of thin air, commanding attention simply because the spotlight is the only place he feels significant. He was performing a theatrical parody of me, shoulders hunched, eyes squinting heavily, fingers typing rapidly on an imaginary desktop calculator. "Here is to our dear Clara," he declared, while the rest of the table grinned in anticipation. 34 years old, no husband, no children, just her endless spreadsheets. A complete social failure who happens to be fantastic at tallying up everybody else's cash. My sister Vanessa giggled directly into her wine glass. "Play nice," she chimed in, using that specific tone people adopt when they actually mean the exact opposite. Then my mother, Evelyn, sitting firmly at the head of the table, the position she demands in every setting, raised her palm to quiet the room as if she were the sole voice of reason and maturity. "Oh, don't tease her," Evelyn said smoothly. "She is perfectly fine. Honestly, she should be grateful. Managing our bills gives her a sense of purpose and makes her feel useful." At that comment, The entire group burst into unrestrained laughter. It was genuine, relaxed amusement, the specific kind of cruelty that only occurs when the participants are entirely confident the subject of their mockery will never find out. I noticed Aunt Martha sitting near the edge of the video frame. She chuckled along with the rest of them, but her gaze immediately dropped down to her dinner plate and remained fixed there. I sat alone in my dim kitchen waiting for tears to form, because weeping is the standard human reaction to heartbreak, isn't it? Yet no tears materialized. Instead, a profound, icy calm washed over my system. It felt stable and precise, resembling a fully reconciled balance sheet where every debit perfectly matches its credit. I reached out and froze the video precisely on the frame where my mother's lips were still shaped around the word grateful. I stared at that frozen image for a prolonged moment. Then, I reached for the one constant element in my existence that has never deceived me, my accounting ledger. Before you form an opinion about my subsequent actions, you need to understand who I am. I work as an independent financial record keeper. I manage the books for a local hardware shop, a veterinary clinic, and a small neighborhood bakery on Oak Avenue that would have gone bankrupt 2 years ago if I hadn't caught a critical cash flow discrepancy the previous accountant overlooked. I am largely self-taught, having later certified my skills through evening courses at the Regional Institute while working full-time during the day. Nobody ever handed me a lucky break or a free client. I built my reputation by ensuring my calculations were never off by a single cent. Business owners trust me because math lacks emotions, and on paper, so do I. Numbers are my safe harbor. Human relationships, on the other hand, are an area where I have always struggled. Whenever I am deeply engrossed in thought, I repeatedly click the top of my ballpoint pen, a rhythmic habit my professional colleagues often joke about. I was clicking that pen repeatedly that evening, without even realizing it. Here is a personal truth I must confess, because this entire narrative makes no sense without it. I possess a fundamental flaw, and it is not fragility. It is the exact opposite. I routinely shoulder heavy burdens before anyone even bothers to ask for assistance. If an invoice arrives, I settle it. If a crisis emerges, I quietly resolve it late at night at this very kitchen table. I never learned how to depend on others for support, so I compensated by transforming myself into the person everyone else desperately required. I convinced myself that this dependency was a badge of strength. I excel at mathematics, but I fail miserably at dealing with individuals who treat generosity like an automated subscription service they forgot they even activated. My family had been utilizing that free subscription for 6 full years. I simply had never generated their official invoice. The situation originally began with the family residence. 6 years ago, my father Thomas passed away suddenly, the rapid way strong men sometimes depart, leaving behind our childhood dwelling and a substantial mortgage he had been secretly struggling to pay. The lending institution began sending those formal, threatening notices that families tend to hide from outsiders. My mother, Evelyn, failed to meet the financial criteria to refinance the property independently, having been out of the traditional workforce for over 3 decades. Derek's credit score was an absolute disaster area, and Vanessa lacked formal employment earnings to report on a loan application. Consequently, the bank evaluated the 4 of us and identified exactly one individual whose credit history and income could satisfy the mathematical requirements: mine. I scheduled a formal meeting with the loan officer and formally purchased the property. My legal name was recorded on the official deed, my credentials were tied to the new mortgage agreement, and my signature authenticated every legally binding document. Because of this, my mother remained comfortably in her familiar surroundings, without ever needing to pack a single cardboard box. That was my sole objective at the time. I did not execute the transaction to exert control or claim ownership. I acted solely to ensure my newly widowed mother wouldn't suffer the indignity of foreclosure during her darkest hour. Everyone in our circle casually acknowledged that I handled the housing situation. That was the exact terminology they preferred. Handled, as though I had simply dispatched a repairman to fix a leaky pipe. They would mention it offhand during neighborhood gatherings. Clara took care of the house paperwork. It was treated as a trivial footnote, light and effortless. Throughout those entire 6 years, not a single family member ever inquired whose legal name actually appeared on the property title. They intentionally avoided that knowledge, because confronting the reality would mean admitting the home no longer legally belonged to Evelyn. They preferred inventing a comforting narrative where our resilient matriarch had bravely maintained her independence through sheer personal willpower. I willingly allowed them to indulge in that fantasy. I remained the silent background figure funding the very roof over their heads, while they gathered beneath it to ridicule my existence. The residence was simply the starting point. Following that major commitment, additional requests began seeping in like water finding structural fractures. I covered Derek's commercial vehicle financing when his independent contracting venture collapsed for the second time, preventing the bank from repossessing the primary tool he needed to earn a living. I paid the monthly tuition for my niece and nephew at their private academy because Vanessa adamantly insisted that withdrawing the midterm would cause irreparable social trauma. I absorbed Vanessa's monthly rental payments after her marital separation, when she claimed she merely needed a 12-month buffer to reestablish her independence. That single year smoothly expanded into 4. Furthermore, there was the continuous, reliable expense of my mother Evelyn's lifestyle. Monthly utility statements, prescription drug co-payments, and local municipal property taxes on the real estate I already legally owned. Every single month followed the exact same routine. On the first day of the calendar cycle, I would sit at this kitchen table with a hot mug of coffee and open my banking portals. I would systematically distribute funds. Click, authorize, transfer. I sent payments to Derek, to Vanessa, to the educational institution, to the power provider, and to my mother's personal account. I never demanded gratitude or staged dramatic conversations about my generosity. I never complained during family dinners or posted self-serving remarks online. I simply watered the family garden. Except this particular garden eventually grew thorns. I maintained individual tracking columns for each relative within my private desktop files, managing them with the same precision I applied to my corporate clients. However, I had never once calculated the cumulative 6-year expenditure. I intentionally avoided highlighting the columns to generate the final grand total at the bottom of the spreadsheet. Subconsciously, I recognized that seeing the actual figure would act as a harsh mirror, forcing me to confront a reality I was not prepared to accept. Computing the sum felt like confessing to my own exploitation. Therefore, I left the numbers uncounted, until the evening my family appeared on a digital recording, proclaiming I should feel grateful for the privilege of serving them. You are likely wondering, how could an intelligent woman, a professional financial analyst, allow herself to be utilized like this for 6 consecutive years? It is a completely valid question, and one I have silently pondered during sleepless nights more frequently than I care to admit. Let me be entirely transparent. I was not naive or oblivious. I made genuine attempts to alter the dynamic. Roughly 3 years into the arrangement, I invited Derek to sit down and politely asked if he could assume even a modest fraction of his children's school expenses now that his income had stabilized. My mother Evelyn received word of this conversation before I even finished my morning tea. She telephoned me immediately and sharply interrupted my explanation. Your brother is under immense stress, Clara. You are the capable, resilient one in this family. Do not dare turn this situation into a drama about your own feelings. I backed down immediately. On another occasion, I attempted to organize a comprehensive family meeting to review our collective financial reality. The scheduled conference had precisely one attendee, myself. I continued writing the checks, but not out of sheer foolishness. I continued because the potential consequences of stopping impacted vulnerable individuals. If I halted the educational funding mid-semester, an innocent child would be forcibly removed from his peer group. If I suspended the mortgage transfers, an elderly widow would face eviction from the property where she had built her life with my father. These were not abstract concepts. They were tangible human beings who would suffer genuine distress. I appeared to be the only responsible adult capable of recognizing that reality. Consequently, I relied on the same internal justification every person in my position uses. I convinced myself that beneath their endless demands, they genuinely cared for me. I chose to believe their gratitude was merely hidden beneath the surface. That was the illusion sustaining my daily routine. When that accidentally forwarded video finally arrived, it provided one profound act of mercy. It permanently destroyed that comforting illusion. I barely slept that night, yet when morning arrived, I brewed my standard pot of coffee because I refused to let emotional turmoil disrupt a productive workday. I sat at my workspace, booted up the computer, and noticed my hand hovering uncertainly above the scheduled transfer dashboard, the system responsible for dispatching recurring automated payments every first of the month. The upcoming billing cycle was approaching rapidly. I checked the paper calendar attached to the refrigerator. Exactly 19 days remained. Then I realized an interesting scheduling coincidence that sent a sharp tingle down my spine. This year, the first day of the month coincided precisely with a Saturday, the exact Saturday scheduled for my mother Evelyn's grand 60th birthday celebration. This was the catered banquet I was fully funding, where dozens of relatives and local acquaintances would convene at the neighborhood reception hall to applaud Evelyn for successfully preserving our family through years of hardship. I sat in silence as my coffee grew cold for the second consecutive morning. For the first time in 6 years, I closed the automated payment portal without authorizing a single transfer. Instead, I launched a blank desktop spreadsheet. I exported 6 years of comprehensive banking archives, downloading every statement across all my accounts, and began reviewing the records with the forensic intensity I apply when investigating corporate financial anomalies. I want to be completely honest about my mindset during this process. I was not plotting a malicious revenge scheme. I was simply conducting a thorough internal audit. There is a fundamental distinction between the two. However, by the time I concluded my analysis hours later, the boundary separating an objective financial review from a calculated retaliation had become entirely blurred. Throughout that weekend, I rewatched the short video clips several times, not to wallow in self-pity, but to analyze the data. I scrutinized the footage frame by frame using the glow of my smartphone, pausing on individual expressions to evaluate their exact level of complicity. Derek was unquestionably the loudest participant, eagerly standing to deliver his mocking performance. Vanessa acted as the supportive background chorus, chiming in with laughter precisely when expected, just as she has done her entire life to align with whoever holds social power. Evelyn clearly served as the orchestra conductor. A subtle wave of her hand silenced the table, while her dry, calculated remarks elicited immediate amusement. She had declared I should feel grateful without even raising her voice. Finally, there was Aunt Martha sitting slightly off camera while holding the recording device. She chuckled along with the group, though always a second late, and her gaze nervously dropped toward the table immediately afterward. While watching the camera movement, a sudden realization struck me. Martha had deliberately recorded this scene, and 3 days later, she had directly transmitted the unedited file to me without adding an explanatory note or apology. She simply delivered the raw evidence straight to the one individual it would impact most deeply. I leaned back in my seat, clicking my pen rhythmically as I evaluated her motives. Was it an accidental transmission caused by clumsy typing on a touchscreen, or was it the deliberate act of a woman lacking the verbal courage to speak up, handing me the weapon she hoped I would wield on her behalf? I could not yet be certain, but I vowed to discover the truth before my audit concluded. The most bizarre aspect of the subsequent days was how utterly normal my relatives acted. 2 days after watching my family brand me a social failure, my smartphone vibrated with routine demands as if nothing had altered our reality. Derek sent a casual message. "Hey sis, commercial vehicle insurance is due this week. Can you handle the payment? Finances are a bit tight right now. There was no polite greeting, no expression of gratitude, just a standard financial demand. Soon after, Vanessa forwarded a website link featuring an $1,100 dining room furniture set accompanied by a brief comment. "Perfect fit for my dining area. What is your opinion?" My translation of her message was simple. She was casually requesting authorization to spend my earnings without recognizing the audacity of her behavior. Later that afternoon, Evelyn dialed my number. I allowed the call to route directly to voicemail and listened to the recording later. "Clara, darling, have you finalized the deposit for the banquet catering? People are confirming their attendance daily. Do not postpone this until the final minute, and please try not to embarrass us with your antisocial silence during the event. Everyone will be observing our family." I chuckled quietly in my solitary kitchen. She had no understanding of how remarkably accurate her prophecy was about to become. Not a single one of them suspected that the woman funding their comfort had finally initiated a comprehensive accounting review. That secrecy represented the sole tactical advantage I possessed. For the first time in 6 years, I controlled the timeline, and my family remained completely oblivious that the countdown had begun. I proceeded to do what I do best. I compiled an immaculate financial archive. I avoided drafting emotional diary entries or angry messages. I constructed a professional workbook containing dedicated worksheets for each individual: Derek, Vanessa, the academic institution, the utility companies, and my mother. I painstakingly reviewed 6 years of historical transaction records, documenting every individual financial transfer. I recorded the exact timestamp, the precise dollar figure, the recipient's identity, and the specific justification for the expenditure. I avoided rounding figures upward to inflate the impact, and I included no subjective commentary. I merely documented the absolute truth, line by line, exactly as I would prepare evidence for an official government tax audit. My hand remained completely steady as I clicked my pen. All physical tremors had vanished. A profound sense of tranquility invariably settles over me whenever I transform chaotic human situations into organized data. The world ceased to be a hostile environment where my relatives ridiculed my existence, becoming instead a straightforward mathematical verification of debits and credits. I printed a sample document simply to experience its physical weight in my hands. Crisp, black typography printed across white paper, listing only dates and monetary amounts. Standing beneath my kitchen lighting, my strategy became crystal clear. I was not manufacturing an offensive weapon. Weapons are inherently noisy, and I was entirely finished raising my voice to gain the attention of people who only valued my consent. Instead, I was polishing an objective mirror, knowing that presenting an unfiltered reflection is often the most devastating consequence you can offer arrogant individuals. The following Sunday, I drove across town to visit Aunt Martha, using the return of a borrowed glass baking dish as my justification. She brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and we sat together at her small dining table while I allowed silence to hang in the air, a reliable interviewing technique I frequently employ with clients who attempt to conceal irregular expenditures. Eventually, the tension broke her resolve. "You watched the recording," she stated softly, speaking a confirmation rather than asking a question. I maintained my silence, allowing my posture to serve as my response. She gripped her ceramic mug tightly with both hands. "I realized the file sent directly to your phone immediately after I tapped the screen," she confessed. I couldn't bring myself to delete or retract it." She looked up, displaying genuine contrition across her features. "I should have intervened during that dinner. Years ago, the very first time they began mocking your lifestyle, I should have laid down my silverware and defended you." She shook her head despondently. "I was simply terrified of becoming the next target of their ridicule." Her statement encapsulated the entire dysfunctional machinery of our household in a single observation. Everyone remained too frightened of group rejection to protect the victim being attacked. I inquired softly, "Was that dinner conversation the first instance?" She refused to meet my direct gaze. "No, my dear," she admitted quietly. That is standard behavior whenever you are absent. The jokes regarding your isolation and obsession with spreadsheets are a permanent fixture at family gatherings. I expressed gratitude for her coffee and departed. I understood her perspective completely. She had provided the single genuine favor anyone in that lineage had offered me in 6 years by delivering unvarnished truth. However, empathizing with someone's weakness does not obligate you to finance their comfort. Martha had delivered the raw data and subsequently washed her hands of whatever consequences might follow. As I drove home, I accepted that I stood entirely alone. I decided to execute a minor preliminary experiment to observe how quickly their affection deteriorated when the financial supply line experienced a brief interruption. I intentionally delayed transferring Vanessa's apartment rent by precisely 3 business days, a very gentle nudge. The subsequent reaction revealed everything I needed to know regarding my true standing within the family hierarchy. Evelyn telephoned me within 60 minutes of the landlord's inquiry. Notice ably, it was not Vanessa who reached out to explain her situation. It was Evelyn, acting as the family's aggressive debt collector, demanding immediate payment. "Clara, what on earth is wrong with your behavior lately?" she demanded, utilizing the sharp, accusatory tone she reserves for individuals she has deemed problematic. Vanessa's property manager contacted her regarding a late payment. Our entire family is discussing how distant and uncooperative you have become. Just because your small accounting practice is gaining clients does not mean you are superior to your own flesh and blood. I held the mobile phone several inches away from my ear and stared at the screen in disbelief. 3 days. I had maintained a flawless zero-error payment record for 6 consecutive years, yet a single 72-hour delay transformed me into an arrogant, unfeeling monster. "Money has never been your primary shortfall, Clara," Evelyn declared, delivering the remark with theatrical precision. "Your unpleasant personality and attitude are the real issues." I calmly replied that I would handle the transaction and terminated the connection. Sitting quietly in my home office, I processed the reality. A minor delay instantly cast me as the family villain. I mentally evaluated what 6 years of absolute financial reliability had actually purchased me. The return on investment was 0. It hadn't earned me basic respect, polite gratitude, or defense during casual dinner conversation. It had merely secured the expectation of perpetual, unrewarded servitude. That same evening, I approached the gray metal filing cabinet situated in the corner of my workspace, the secure repository housing the vital legal documentation of my adult life. From the deepest section of the bottom drawer, I retrieved a thick, expandable folder I hadn't examined since the closing date 6 years prior, the real estate acquisition settlement binder. I placed the documents across my kitchen table, spreading them under the warm overhead lighting. There were no glowing screens or mocking voices here, only legal facts recorded on paper. I reviewed the pages systematically. The official warranty deed recorded by the municipal clerk clearly identified the sole grantee in bold typography, Clara M. Bennett. The primary promissory note listed the sole borrower of record, Clara M. Bennett, complete with my notarized signature from 6 years ago. The settlement statements, title insurance policies, and escrow agreements all confirm the absolute legal reality. I was the sole lawful owner of the residential real estate. I gently traced my thumb across the raised notary seal. I had always possessed this cognitive awareness, of course. I had signed the contracts personally, but intellectual awareness differs vastly from visually examining the physical proof displayed across your desk. The residence my siblings casually referred to as Mother's Home, the venue where they routinely gathered to belittle my life choices, the property Evelyn publicly claimed she maintained through personal determination. That house belonged legally and indisputably to me. I had simultaneously served as both the landlord and the primary target of my tenants' disdain. I had funded the literal ceiling over their heads while they judged me a personal failure. I clicked my ballpoint pen once, laid it firmly across the warranty deed, and felt the lingering emotional fog evaporate entirely. All indecision vanished. My remaining task was determining how to execute my departure so cleanly that no one could ever portray my actions as irrational or malicious. Early the next morning, I confronted the mathematical reality I had actively avoided for 6 years. I launched the comprehensive accounting workbook, navigated to the summary dashboard, highlighted the individual data columns, and allowed the automated software to calculate the cumulative expenditure. The final sum materialized instantly at the bottom of my monitor. I will not state the precise dollar figure publicly, as the exact numerical value is secondary to the underlying principle, and declaring the total would sound like self-promotion, a trait I have actively avoided my entire life. However, I will confirm that the cumulative total could have purchased a comfortable home outright several times over. It represented a robust retirement portfolio I had sacrificed, and the figure was substantially higher than my most pessimistic estimates. Curiously, I did not shed tears over the lost financial capital. Money consists merely of numerical digits, and arithmetic holds no emotional power to wound me. What genuinely broke my composure as I stared at the illuminated display was the massive expenditure of personal time. I mourned the 6 years of Friday evenings spent working late in isolation, the social engagements I canceled to finalize their emergency payments, and the vacation trips I forfeited because the first day of the month demanded my financial presence. I allowed myself to weep quietly for roughly 4 minutes. Then I dried my cheeks with the back of my hand, mirroring my late father's stoic habit, and regained emotional control. Shedding tears is merely a physiological reaction, not a strategic plan. I finally understood the literal truth behind my mother's recorded statement. She had proclaimed I ought to feel grateful. In reality, she was entirely correct that profound gratitude was owed, except they were the ones who should have been profoundly grateful that for 6 consecutive years I had never once tabulated their cumulative invoice. If you have ever carried the heavy responsibility of serving as everyone's financial safety net while fearing the actual cost of your sacrifices, you understand the exact burden I felt at that desk. What followed next involved no shouting or theatrics. It was simply an exercise in absolute transparency. If this scenario sounds familiar to your own life experiences, please share your perspective in the comments below, and remember to subscribe to follow the conclusion of this journey. The initial practical test of my new policy occurred when Derek attempted to follow up on his vehicle insurance payment request. His previous message, completely void of basic pleasantries, remained visible on my device. In the past, I would have authorized the electronic transfer within an hour without uttering a word of complaint. This time, I deliberately let 24 hours elapse before crafting a single measured response containing zero emotional friction, because displaying anger would have merely provided him with a target to attack. I simply typed, "I am unable to finance that expenditure this month." That was the entire message. There were no elaborate justifications or defensive apologies attached. Long ago, I discovered that a direct, unambiguous refusal, stripped of excuses, is the most difficult barrier for manipulative individuals to overcome. My mobile device rang almost instantaneously. It was Derek, predictable as always. His superficial friendliness evaporated within seconds. "What do you mean? Since when are you unable?" he demanded aggressively over the connection. "You have your accounting clients paying you regularly. What arbitrary purchase are you hoarding cash for just to make yourself feel superior?" I maintained complete vocal silence, which only escalated his agitation. "You really believe you are above this family now, sitting alone with your accounting software?" Then, unable to restrain his ingrained contempt, the exact character trait revealed in the video recording, he uttered the familiar insult. "Do not pretend you aren't the miserable failure in this family, Clara." There it was once more. Failure. The identical insult delivered by the identical voice, except this time I heard it live over the telephone rather than through a recorded file. I allowed a long period of silence to stretch across the line. Finally, I responded with 2 simple words, "Understood, Derek?" and immediately disconnected the call. A single sentence, "I am unable to finance that expenditure," cost me 0 effort, yet it disrupted his entire financial structure. We both immediately recognized who held the true leverage in our dynamic. Following that disconnection, my phone began vibrating incessantly. It is remarkable how a family cluster that never initiates contact to inquire about your emotional well-being will suddenly communicate non-stop the moment their financial supply pipeline constricts. Vanessa initiated the bombardment, messaging to declare my behavior entirely selfish, given the professional pressure Derek was currently experiencing. Shortly thereafter, a distant cousin who hadn't contacted me in over 12 months sent a message expressing deep concern over potential family discord. Finally, Evelyn deployed her heavy authority. She avoided calling directly, opting instead to transmit a written message, likely because she wanted her words to carry permanent visual weight. After everything this family has sacrificed for your upbringing. That was the entire text. I read her statement while standing beside my kitchen sink, and I genuinely laughed aloud. After everything this family has sacrificed for me. I actually reopened my analytical spreadsheet and scanned the historical archives just to ensure I hadn't overlooked some hidden ledger where their financial or emotional assistance flowed toward me. No such records existed. The sum total of their support over 6 years fit comfortably within the absolute zero displayed at the bottom of my charts. I placed the mobile device face down across the countertop and systematically ignored every incoming notification from my siblings, my cousin, and my mother. Instead, I opened my desk drawer and retrieved a packet of heavy manila envelopes, arranging 4 of them in a neat horizontal line across the surface. I smoothed the uppermost envelope with my palm. While I had not yet composed the exact written statements going inside them, the structural architecture of my resolution was fully finalized. For the first time in 6 consecutive years, the peaceful silence within my home felt entirely under my ownership. I evaluated my tactical execution carefully, recognizing that delivery methodology dictates the ultimate success of any strategic confrontation. I possess the power to release the spreadsheets into our shared digital group chat, publicly naming every expenditure and forcing them to read their financial dependency on their personal screens. Alternatively, I could have telephoned each individual directly to verbalize the painful truths I had suppressed for half a decade. I could have engineered a loud, chaotic argument, but shouting represents their preferred communication style, not mine. Engaging in loud arguments keeps you trapped in the room, constantly defending, debating, and explaining your position to individuals committed to misunderstanding you. I was exhausted from inhabiting that room. Therefore, I designed a counter-strategy consisting of 4 distinct phases, writing each step down to prevent emotional hesitation. Phase 1, I would formally transfer the real estate title back to Evelyn, restructuring the paperwork so she would assume full legal responsibility for the outstanding mortgage balance, thereby neutralizing any future claims that I seized her home. Phase 2, every discretionary financial subsidy, the vehicle insurance, the apartment rent, the educational tuition, would permanently cease on the first day of the upcoming month. Phase 3, I would present each relative with a sealed envelope containing their comprehensive 6-year expenditure audit, accompanied by a formal notification specifying the payment termination date. Phase 4, the most critical rule. I would refuse to engage in verbal debate. I would deliver my statement, distribute the documentation, and immediately exit the venue. I refuse to argue because prolonged conflict creates ongoing emotional entanglement. My objective was to settle the outstanding accounts and depart permanently. The calendar timing fortuitously supported my strategy. The automated payment schedules coincided precisely with Evelyn's milestone birthday banquet. I chose to allow that scheduling alignment to serve as the backdrop for my final presentation. I am aware that some observers might suggest I should have simply emailed the spreadsheets and blocked their contact numbers immediately. However, executing this boundary in person was vital to reclaiming my dignity. If you have ever been forced to establish firm limits with individuals who only value your utility, observing this face-to-face resolution will resonate deeply. Let us examine the events of that celebration. I executed my preparations with total professional objectivity, approaching the task exactly as I manage corporate accounting reconciliations. Initially, I consulted a trusted professional colleague, a certified public accountant, to review the legal and financial mechanics of my plan without disclosing personal identities. Next, I scheduled a formal consultation with a local real estate attorney, compensating her at her standard hourly billing rate. She explained the legal realities with absolute clarity. Because the property title was registered exclusively under my name, I held full legal authority to transfer ownership to my mother, Evelyn. However, the attorney explicitly cautioned me regarding a detail I already understood. Deeding the property title did not automatically extinguish the underlying mortgage debt. The financial liability would remain legally attached to my name unless Evelyn successfully qualified to assume the existing loan or secured an independent refinancing package. If Evelyn's financial profile failed to satisfy banking requirements, she would be forced to liquidate the real estate or independently generate the monthly mortgage capital. The financial liability traveled alongside the ownership title. The attorney observed my expression intently while explaining this concept, verifying that I fully grasped the gravity of my decision. I confirmed my complete understanding. My intention was not to engineer Evelyn's financial ruin, but rather to transfer the actual weight of the home she claimed to have supported independently for 6 years. It was time for her to manage her responsibilities as an independent adult, exactly as I had done. Regarding the secondary subsidies, the vehicle costs, residential rent, and tuition bills, the legal counsel confirmed these constituted voluntary personal gifts, which could be legally terminated at my discretion without formal advance warning. Nevertheless, I elected to provide written notification to maintain absolute professional integrity. I commissioned the attorney to draft clean property transfer deeds and composed brief, objective cover letters for each manila envelope. The text contained zero emotional language, only verified dates and numerical totals. Historical facts require no aggressive embellishment to make their impact felt. Meanwhile, the preparation for the banquet continued around me, driven entirely by the unspoken assumption that I would finance and manage every logistical detail. Naturally, I had already settled the rental fee for the church reception hall months prior, back during the period when I still believed financial generosity and silence were required to secure family affection. I had also fully covered the professional catering invoices. Beyond the financial expectations, a secondary demand loomed over the event: the collective expectation that I would deliver a public speech. I was expected to stand before the crowd as the devoted, reliable daughter to offer a glowing tribute to our resilient matriarch. Evelyn had been broadcasting this expectation throughout the neighborhood for weeks. I learned of her boasting indirectly during a routine trip to the grocery store, when an elderly neighbor approached my shopping cart with a bright smile. "Evelyn talks incessantly about how well you manage her affairs, Clara. She is so proud of her little bookkeeper who handles all the tedious paperwork." I offered the neighbor a polite smile, murmured a gracious response, and navigated my cart toward the adjacent aisle. Standing among the dry goods, my resolve solidified. Without realizing it, my family had constructed an ideal public platform, a reception hall filled with extended relatives, local neighbors, and community leaders, all assembled to watch me perform the role of the submissive, grateful daughter one final time. They had provided the microphone, the audience, and the stage lighting. I decided to utilize their platform, but I would substitute their fictional script with the verified financial truth. The afternoon prior to the celebration, I visited the banquet hall to inspect the physical arrangements, where I received a timely reminder confirming the necessity of my plan. Derek was already present, casually leaning against a ladder while holding a beverage, loudly entertaining a group of younger cousins, while supposedly hanging decorative signage. As I entered the doorway carrying a box of glassware, he grinned at the crowd and gestured toward me with his thumb. "Watch your behavior, everyone," he announced loudly across the room. "Do not antagonize the family ATM. Her operating system has been rather temperamental this week. The younger cousins offered awkward, hesitant chuckles, clearly uncertain whether his comment was intended as humor. Vanessa was situated nearby, arranging floral centerpieces. When I approached her to discuss a minor catering invoice clarification, she dismissively waved her hand. "Please, Clara. Nobody wants to discuss boring receipts during a celebration. Learn to read the room." Evelyn drifted past our conversation entirely, busily adjusting the collar of Vanessa's dress without glancing in my direction, treating my presence as part of the hired venue staff. However, standing quietly in the corner, observing these interactions, was my 19-year-old cousin Jenna, currently home for a university break. She caught my direct gaze, and her facial expression displayed a genuine reaction the others lacked. She visibly winced. She had witnessed the exchange clearly. "Do not antagonize the ATM." Derek had delivered the remark as casual humor, but my tolerance for his jokes had expired years ago. Public mockery is merely cruelty disguised as entertainment, and I had served as the punchline at our family table for entirely too long. Tomorrow, for the very first time, I would deliver the final line of that joke. Jenna followed me outdoors onto the covered porch while I stepped away to get some fresh air. She is a perceptive young woman, the sole member of the extended family who remembers to send a birthday greeting without prompting. "Aunt Clara," she said softly, wrapping her arms around her shoulders against the chill. "Are you doing all right? They shouldn't address you in that manner. It is entirely disrespectful." I stared at her 19-year-old face for several seconds. She represented the first individual in 6 years to ask about my personal well-being rather than my financial capacity or event planning progress. That single display of empathy momentarily challenged my emotional detachment, not out of hesitation, but because I suddenly feared she might misinterpret my upcoming actions as irrational vengeance. I wanted to protect her from viewing my boundary as mere cruelty. "I am perfectly fine, Jenna," I assured her gently. "In fact, I feel more grounded than I have in years." She frowned slightly, sensing deeper context beneath my words. "They completely exploit your generosity," she observed accurately. "You are the only relative who genuinely supports people without hidden motives." That observation reaffirmed my commitment. I realized the most supportive lesson I could offer this young woman was not demonstrating endless, silent endurance. The kindest action I could model was publicly proving that an individual holds the absolute right to terminate their own exploitation, that establishing firm boundaries and walking away with your dignity intact does not constitute an act of warfare. I gently squeezed her hand. "Please make sure to stand near me tomorrow afternoon," I requested quietly, immediately after I conclude my public toast. That evening, I sat in the stillness of my kitchen and assembled the physical documentation. The heavy manila envelopes were arranged in sequence, one dedicated to each adult family member. Inside Evelyn's envelope, I inserted the legally executed warranty deed, transferring real estate ownership to her name, accompanied by the formal legal counsel notification explaining her obligation to assume the underlying mortgage debt, along with her complete 6-year expenditure summary totaled at the bottom. Inside Derek's envelope, I placed his individual financial audit, documenting every vehicle installment, insurance settlement, and commercial subsidy, clearly stamped with the exact termination date. Inside Vanessa's envelope, I included the historical tally of 4 years of residential rent payments and furniture purchases, marked with the same termination timeline. I securely sealed each envelope and inscribed their names across the front using my neat, precise professional handwriting. My fingers remained completely stable throughout the process. I signed the explanatory cover letters, the sharp click of my pen cap echoing rhythmically in the quiet room like a steady clock. My smartphone remained face down across the desk throughout the evening. I felt no impulse to re-examine the recording. The mocking laughter captured on that file had completely lost its power over me. There were no dramatic speeches to rehearse in front of a mirror. Having spent 6 years communicating my consent through silent financial actions, I intended to communicate my refusal through the exact same medium, quietly, definitively, and entirely in writing, leaving zero room for verbal debate. I switched off the workspace lighting and retired to bed, sleeping soundly through the night for the first time in nearly a month. By 4 o'clock the following afternoon, the neighborhood reception hall was packed to capacity. The room featured the standard aesthetic of community gatherings: long folding tables arranged in parallel rows, a massive sheet cake illuminated by overhead fluorescent bulbs, and a glittery decorative banner celebrating Evelyn's 60th milestone. Dozens of extended relatives, neighborhood acquaintances, and local community leaders were present. Evelyn positioned herself near the dessert table, wearing an elegant new dress, graciously accepting compliments, and eagerly repeating her preferred fictional narrative to anyone willing to listen. Well, after Thomas passed away, someone had to step forward and hold this household together, she declared loudly as I walked toward the table. I simply did what a mother had to do. She caught my gaze across the crowded room and offered a pointed nod, her visual signal indicating my speaking slot was approaching. Derek stood nearby, already holding a drink and grinning broadly. Vanessa lingered closely beside Evelyn, enjoying the collective social attention. Across the room, Cousin Jenna caught my eye and delivered a supportive, subtle nod. Once the ceremonial cake cutting concluded, Evelyn tapped her metal fork against a champagne flute, instantly silencing the room. With a theatrical flourish of her hand toward my position, she announced, "I believe my eldest daughter Clara wishes to offer a few remarks. She is the wonderful person who coordinated this lovely celebration. She is remarkably skilled at handling our logistical needs." Polite applause rippled across the assembly. The audience sat waiting to hear the submissive, devoted daughter express profound gratitude. I rose from my chair experiencing a profound inner calm, identical to the mental clarity I feel when a complex corporate audit finally balances perfectly. I held no beverage glass in my hand. Instead, I carried the neat stack of 4 manila envelopes. The crisp click of my ballpoint pen cap echoed clearly through the quiet hall. I had brought a contribution significantly more accurate than a traditional celebratory toast. "I want to express my appreciation to everyone present for joining us to honor my mother today," I began, projecting my voice clearly across the room. 60 years of life is certainly a milestone deserving of recognition. I paused momentarily, allowing the warm sentiment to settle over the audience before shifting my tone. "Therefore, I have prepared a specialized presentation." I lifted the primary document packet. "Mother, this first envelope is for your retention. It contains the legally recorded real estate warranty deed for our family residence. That property title has been registered exclusively under my name for the past 6 years, ever since I personally acquired the mortgage from the lending institution following Father's death to prevent property foreclosure. This afternoon, I am formally transferring legal ownership back to you. The house is now entirely yours, completely unencumbered by my legal involvement." A soft ripple of confusion moved through the assembly. This legal disclosure diverged sharply from standard birthday tributes. Evelyn's practiced smile instantly froze across her features. "Along with the property title," I continued in a calm, measured tone, "you will also assume responsibility for the underlying monthly mortgage debt, which I have funded entirely from my personal earnings for the past 72 months. The legal documentation inside explains the bank's formal loan assumption procedures. You will need to contact the loan officer on Monday morning." Next, I selected the remaining packets. Derek, Vanessa. I stepped forward and deposited their dedicated envelopes directly onto the table before them. Contained within these folders are verified accounting ledgers detailing every financial subsidy I have provided to support your households. Every vehicle installment, residential rent check, insurance settlement, and private tuition payment over the past 6 years has been documented line by line to the exact penny. I have added no subjective commentary or inflated calculations. I have merely compiled the verified banking records. The low murmur in the room escalated into audible conversation. Extended relatives exchanged confused glances, while neighborhood guests sat completely frozen. Derek had torn open his packet, his facial complexion turning pale as his eyes scanned the cumulative dollar sum printed at the bottom of his spreadsheet. Vanessa sat immobilized in her folding chair. Evelyn stared down at the legal transfer deed in her lap, as though handling a hazardous material. I maintained my vocal pitch at a steady, neutral level, void of aggression, because my mission was establishing historical accuracy, not inflicting emotional cruelty. For 6 long years, I addressed the assembly clearly. I have been repeatedly reminded that I should feel grateful for my role in this family. Therefore, surrounded by the friends and neighbors who respect this household, I wanted to present the verified financial record to clarify precisely who has been supporting whom. Evelyn sprang from her seat with such physical force that her folding chair tipped backward, crashing loudly against the flooring, the sharpest sound in the paralyzed room. "How dare you!" she screamed, her vocal tone becoming shrill and combative across the public hall. "How dare you stage this malicious stunt at my celebration in front of our entire community? You have always possessed this toxic, jealous need for attention, Clara." The property deed slid from her lap onto the floorboards, entirely ignored. "You believe compiling paper spreadsheets makes you superior to your own family?" Derek immediately jumped to his feet, crushing his financial ledger within his fist. "You compiled a few invoices," he shouted aggressively, "and now you act like you are better than us? You have always acted arrogant." Vanessa finally opened her binder, her facial expression collapsing into panic as she registered the cumulative 4-year rental total, and she began sobbing loudly, though her tears clearly stemmed from financial panic rather than genuine remorse. The entire hall remained immobilized. Dozens of neighbors and local leaders sat watching Evelyn scream accusations across a church facility during her 60th birthday celebration. Through this chaotic explosion, the most significant triumph of my strategy became evident. I never raised my voice a single decibel. I stood quietly at the center of their emotional tempest, experiencing total psychological stability. I waited patiently until Evelyn paused to catch her breath, then responded in a tone so quiet the audience had to strain to hear my words. "I am not requesting your gratitude, nor am I demanding an apology. I am simply serving notice that I am permanently finished paying to serve as your subject of ridicule." From the rear rows, an elderly neighborhood resident who had been a close friend of my late father spoke audibly to his table mate. Good heavens, the one they called a failure was the individual funding their entire existence. That verbal realization rippled across the room face by face as the community grasped the financial reality behind the family's facade. Cousin Jenna promptly walked across the hall, taking her place firmly beside me and grasping my hand in support. I placed the final administrative folder onto the table, the master summary specifying the absolute termination timelines for all automated banking transfers. I avoided staging a theatrical departure. I simply set the documents down with professional precision. Turning toward the General Assembly, ignoring Evelyn, Derek, and Vanessa entirely, I addressed the crowd. "Thank you once again for attending this celebration today. I genuinely wish you all a pleasant evening." I retrieved my winter coat from the back of my chair. "All recurring financial transfers terminate permanently on the 1st of the month," I stated clearly to the room, speaking with the routine calm of reading a weather forecast. "The residential property is now under your legal authority, Mother. I sincerely hope it provides everything you have claimed it represents." Evelyn opened her mouth to launch another verbal assault, but recognizing the dozens of community witnesses observing her behavior, she abruptly closed it without uttering a sound. I buttoned my winter coat calmly. With Jenna walking at my side, I navigated toward the exit, passing tables of neighbors who were no longer smiling or laughing. I felt their intense scrutiny following my departure, and for the first time in my life, public observation brought me no discomfort. Stepping outside, the crisp evening air felt remarkably refreshing. Out of ingrained habit, I retrieved my smartphone from my pocket. The screen remained completely dark, free of any notifications I felt compelled to review. I returned the device to my pocket, entered my vehicle, and drove the 15-minute route back to my personal residence. The modest home registered exclusively under my legal name, completely free of anyone else's demands or expectations. I did not slam a single door during my departure from that hall. I simply stopped utilizing my own strength to hold the door open for those who refused to respect me. The subsequent real-world adjustments unfolded precisely as my financial analysis predicted, though at a significantly accelerated pace. Evelyn contacted the mortgage lending institution the following Monday morning, finally discovering the actual monthly capital expenditure required to preserve the real estate. Lacking the personal income to service the full debt independently, she was forced to execute a loan modification package, dramatically curbing her discretionary spending for the first time in her adult life to retain the dwelling at age 60. Derek liquidated his commercial vehicle within 30 days. Objective analysis revealed he had possessed the earning capacity to finance his own vehicle installments for years, but simply avoided doing so while my subsidies continued. Vanessa relocated to a more modest apartment complex across town and secured part-time employment managing the reception desk at a local dental clinic, her first formal wage-earning position in over 4 years. Predictably, the narrative they broadcast to the local community portrayed me as a heartless daughter who had cruelly abandoned her grieving family and humiliated her widowed mother during a milestone celebration. Certain distant relatives accepted their version without question. However, the attendees who witnessed the confrontation directly, the individuals who watched Evelyn's public outburst while reading the mathematical ledgers over Derek's shoulder, maintained a cautious, skeptical distance from them afterward. I made zero effort to defend my reputation to anyone. I had finally learned that fundamental lesson: accurate financial ledgers communicate the truth independently without requiring verbal reinforcement. When a distant aunt telephoned to deliver an unsolicited lecture regarding family forgiveness and moral duty, I declined to debate her assertions. I simply responded, "This is not a matter upon which I am seeking external consultation," wished her a pleasant evening, and terminated the call. That complete sentence remains one of the most effective tools I recommend for closing an unwanted conversation immediately. Following those events, my daily routine became remarkably peaceful and subsequently genuinely fulfilling. I accepted contracts with 2 additional corporate clients, capitalizing on the mental bandwidth, financial resources, and evening hours I had reclaimed after 6 years of servitude. I scheduled an entire weekend vacation, driving up to a regional mountain lake without packing a single laptop or spreadsheet, rediscovering the serene joy of controlling my own schedule. Approximately 30 days after the banquet, my smartphone displayed a brief text message from Aunt Martha containing 2 simple sentences. "You executed the right decision. I am truly sorry I lacked the courage to do the same." I studied her message for several minutes. Her words were authentic, and transmitting that admission required genuine humility on her part. However, a brief digital apology was insufficient to erase years of participatory laughter and passive silence. Both of us understood that reality. Therefore, I replied with simple politeness, "Thank you, Martha. I acknowledge your message," and archived the conversation. I did not extend an invitation for her to re-enter my personal life. Understanding the root cause of an individual's weakness does not create a mandatory obligation to continually finance their second chances. Conversely, I actively cultivated my relationship with cousin Jenna. She contacts me regularly now, never to request financial favors, but simply to share updates regarding her university studies and personal life. Occasionally, she drives to my house, where we prepare dinner together and enjoy equal, reciprocal conversation. That represents the only style of interpersonal ledger I maintain anymore. Agreements where both participants actively contribute to balance the account. As for the remainder of my relatives, they possess my contact details and know my residential address. My door is not permanently barred against them. I have simply ceased utilizing my personal resources to hold it open on their behalf. If they ever wish to reestablish a relationship, they must follow the precedent I established. They must carry their own weight. That evening taught me a vital lesson I wish I had mastered at age 28. Personal generosity is not a permanent debt that entitled individuals get to extract from your life indefinitely. The day you finally assemble the ledger and compute the true cost of your relationships, you discover with absolute clarity who genuinely valued your presence and who merely valued your financial utility. That is my complete testimony. 6 years of silent endurance, 4 manila envelopes, and 1 milestone celebration that permanently established the truth. If you are currently serving as the exhausted, unappreciated safety net keeping an entitled group afloat, consider this narrative your personal permission slip. You hold the absolute right to set the burden down and walk away with your dignity intact. If this account resonated with your own experiences, please share it with someone who needs encouragement. Leave a comment detailing your perspective and hit subscribe to join our community for future stories.